What's up, everybody? Welcome back with another video. We are here with fantasy football reaction to week 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through all the games today. I'm going to give you from each team that played today one player that you want to pick up on the waiver wire and one player that you already have on your roster, whether or not you want to buy or sell them. If you're interested in more videos, please check out my channel. I make fantasy football, but a lot of other content too, so check it out. We'll get right into it. So we're going to start first with the Carolina and Atlanta game. So one player that you want to pick up from Carolina is Hayden Hurst, the tight end. Hayden Hurst coming over from the Bengals last season. Led the team in targets today. Mostly slept on throughout the offseason. Not a lot of people talking about him as much as guys like Adam Thielen or DJ Chark. Both of them dealing with injuries. And Hurst steps up 5 of 41 with 1 touchdown and 7 targets. This is a good low-risk pickup at the tight end position who's looks like he's going to get involvement, especially with Bryce Young still learning the offense, relying on the tight end more. Pretty good pickup to consider as your tight end if you're in need of one. One guy on this roster that I would recommend buying is Miles Sanders. So Miles Sanders did not have a touchdown this game, so the numbers weren't great, but you really like the volume that you have here. 18 carries of 72 yards. He also had 6 targets in which he had 4 receptions and 26 yards. This shows me that he is getting a lot of looks in this offense. He's going to have a lot of opportunity. This was a game where Carolina was trailing for most of the game. Atlanta's defense looks like it's revitalized and a lot stronger, so Miles Sanders should have a lot of involvement, and I would recommend trying to get him at a good price as a buy candidate. For Atlanta, so Atlanta, Tyler Allegier is a good guy that you want to pick up on waivers. So this was a very surprising outcome for him because a lot of people talking about Bijan Robinson and his impact, but this game shows that Atlanta is trying to run a 2 running back system. Bijan is their change of pace back, but then Tyler Allegier more of the goal line back. And in both situations, he had goal line touchdowns that were led to a pretty good fantasy output. 5 of 75, 2 touchdowns. Also had 3 targets for 19 yards. He's going to have involvement and will be a very valuable fantasy asset, especially if anything were to happen to Bijan Robinson injury. Sell candidate, Drake London. So this is, again, I'm not typically a fan of selling guys when they have very low stock in a case like this where it's 0 for 0 on 1 target. But with this Atlanta offense, we don't see big play explosive looks to the wide receivers. This was especially last year we saw with Arthur Smith, this affect Kyle Pitts. Drake London getting 1 target, especially when you have Mac Hollins, a new wide receiver in the system who's getting 4 targets, 3 for 31, and you get multiple targets to Bijan Robinson, Tyler Allegier, and Atlanta is successful in this format is concerning. Is Drake London going to have good games in the future moving forward? Yes. However, I would recommend that to pivot from this situation because I think it's just going to continue to get more rocky as the season goes along. Next game we're going to look at is Cincinnati and Cleveland. Very surprised about this outcome. Not so much talking about the game. Let's talk about Cincinnati players to pick up. So one that I would target for Cincinnati is Irv Smith. So we just talked about Hayden Hurst and his departure. Irv Smith is a guy who's had potential with Minnesota in the past and is now stepping into this role with Cincinnati. He's going to have some involvement moving forward, and I think will be a good streaming candidate at the tight end position week to week. Nothing crazy here. He had 3 of 17 on 5 targets, but this was a pretty sleepy effort from the entire Bengals offense. So I wouldn't make too much of these performances. And the key thing that I want to highlight in terms of that is that buy candidate for me is T. Higgins. T. Higgins, terrible game. He had no catches. He did have 8 targets though. So you may be looking at T. Higgins as a flat 0 on somebody's roster, and people who don't really follow fantasy football will panic about that and try to trade him away. But this is a guy that's going to get tons of opportunity moving forward. He would be a 1A wide receiver on multiple teams if he wasn't on the Bengals. So definitely a guy you want to consider buying. Cleveland. So Cleveland, one of the guys that I would consider picking up, and this is in deep league formats, is Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford is their backup running back to Nick Chubb. And this is a situation where the game script probably caused him to get more carries than we would typically see, 15 of 36. But what we do like is that he is getting his opportunity on this team and is the clear number 2 to Nick Chubb. So if you're in a deep league and you need a handcuff to Nick Chubb, if you took him in the 1st or 2nd round, for example, then this is a guy that you definitely want to have on your roster as a handcuff should anything happen to Chubb. So something to consider in deep league formats. I would also consider buying Elijah Moore on this team. Elijah Moore, a guy who went late in drafts, probably undrafted in some leagues as well, but 7 targets, 3 for 43. He doesn't have the big name hype of guys like Amari Cooper, but Elijah Moore will be involved, and especially in games where Cleveland is going to need to pass the ball more, especially if they're playing from behind. Elijah Moore is going to have this opportunity. Good buy low candidate that you can probably get pretty cheap. Next game we're going to look at is Jacksonville and Indianapolis. So looking at the Indianapolis sideline, Zay Jones is a receiver that I'm targeting from this team. Zay Jones, amazing touchdown catch today, but a guy that was probably not on waiver, probably not picked up in the draft. It is going to be available on waivers. He got 7 targets in this game, 5 for 55 and a touchdown. So he has involvement in this offense and is stepping up as the number 2 receiver. So this is a guy that, again, should be able to plug in week to week. Probably not someone who you want to rely on weekly, but you like his involvement early from Trevor Lawrence. Another player on this team. So this is a potential controversial take, but this is a good time to sell on Travis Ettienne. Travis Ettienne had a pretty good game, 18 carries, 77 yards, and a touchdown. He also had 5 receptions for 27 yards. But this is a player who has had issues with injuries in the past. He's also very game script dependent, but also with Jacksonville, they have a running back, Tank Bigsby, who is very highly touted and is expected to get looks as the season goes along. He had a touchdown in this game, and it was said from the coaching staff that they were going to work Bigsby in slowly. So the question I have with Ettienne is that he has a lot of volume in this game, and he got a touchdown out of it. Looks pretty good so far, but how long is that going to last? And if you could package Ettienne to get a running back who did not have a great game but should have more safety, so for example, Joe Mixon from a game we just talked about, I would try to use Ettienne as one of the players that I would try to target someone like Joe Mixon or Jahmyr Gibbs, who I talked about in a previous video. Move over to Indianapolis. So for Indianapolis, the player that I would consider picking up is Zach Moss. Again, for me personally, I would not target this Indianapolis running core. Even with Jonathan Taylor, I think that the offensive line is not great. I think that the running back talent outside of Jonathan Taylor is not great, so I don't know how much Zach Moss will help the situation, but he's going to get a lot of opportunity because Deion Jackson and Jake Funk did not do anything with their opportunity today. So just a consideration, but not a guy that I would particularly target very high, but for next week until Jonathan Taylor comes back, he's an interesting candidate to consider for the first few weeks of the season. Guys that I would target, Anthony Richardson as a buy candidate. I think that Anthony Richardson is going to be a great fantasy football asset. He already started off on a great foot today with a rushing touchdown, passing touchdown, over 200 yards passing. So again, you want to go after these guys that have good running floors because they're going to always give you a baseline should they have a bad game passing the football. And Anthony Richardson getting 40 yards and a touchdown gives you a 10-point floor regardless of what he does passing the football. So he's going to have better games as the season goes along. He just needs to stay healthy. Kind of got hit pretty hard there at the end of that game, but I do really like his prospects moving forward for this season. Next game that we're going to talk about is Tampa Bay and Minnesota. So just want to highlight somebody to pick up on Tampa Bay. Congrats to Baker Mayfield. This guy's been through a lot over the last 2 seasons. This is his 4th team in 2 years, but he really played a great game today, and he showed in this game that he's a worthy candidate in the quarterback position to pick up and stream from week to week. I don't really like him as a long-term option that you want to roster throughout the whole season, but he's somebody that if you play the streaming quarterback game, he's going to be somebody that you can rely on. So Baker Mayfield has some good opportunities moving forward that I think could make him a valuable candidate to pick up depending on your QB situation. Another guy I would consider to buy that's probably on your roster is Rashaad White. Rashaad White did not have a very good game. He had, let me just pull up the stats real quick. He had a total of 17 carries for 39 yards, which is not good at all. He also had 2 catches for 10 yards. So if you maybe having him on your roster, you may be pretty disappointed with his output. But 17 carries is very good. Minnesota played a pretty good game against the rush defense today. Defensively, he's going to have some opportunities moving forward that I think is going to make him a valuable candidate, especially if somebody who has the clear volume in this offense. So this is a Rachaad White I would consider buying, and somebody you could probably get at a pretty low price. Minnesota. So not a lot of guys of note to highlight that you can pick up. I would highlight KJ Osborn in deep leagues as somebody to consider. 6 targets, 3 for 31. In shallow, I don't know if shallow is the right word, but in smaller leagues, if Jordan Addison is not rostered, you definitely want to pick him up. 4 for 61 and 1. But more than likely, he is somebody who was picked up late in drafts. But KJ Osborn is somebody to consider as well, because this offense is very pass heavy. And if anything were to happen to Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborn is going to have his opportunities. Somebody on Minnesota that I would consider buying as well is Alexander Mattison. So Alexander Mattison did not have a great game. He did get a touchdown out of it to salvage what he had, but 11 of 34, 310, and 1 touchdown through the air. So not a great performance, but again, much like Rachaad White, he's going to have more opportunities, and game scripts that are going to work to his advantage, where they're going to be running the ball more, they're going to be ahead. And he's another guy that's got the clear snap count and clear volume percentage versus the other running backs of guys that are getting on the field. He's going to have opportunity moving forward. I like Alexander Mattison as a buy candidate for you. Next game I want to highlight is Tennessee and New Orleans. So for Tennessee, player that I would really consider picking up is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. So this guy was number 2 in targets. We often expected Treylon Burks to be in this position, but Westbrook-Ikhine in deep leagues is somebody to consider. He had 7 targets, 4 of 58 through the air, which again was second on the team in terms of both receptions, yardage, and targets. So you like this outcome in a game where Tennessee needed to pass to catch up, that Westbrook-Ikhine could be a considerable flex candidate if you're in a real pinch to throw somebody in there. If anything were to happen with Hopkins, then this guy could potentially step up. Burks is already dealing with injuries as well, so somebody that's a consideration. Speaking of Hopkins, so as much as it pains me to say this because I love Hopkins and I used to rely on him all the time when he was on the Texans as my go-to receiver in fantasy football, he's a considerable sell candidate for me. And I say considerable because I would only really sell him in certain situations. The glass half full look with Hopkins is that he got 13 targets in this game. He was 7 of 65, which is really good. You like seeing guys that get 10-plus targets you want to have on your fantasy roster, especially if they didn't get a touchdown out of it, then go for them. But on the other hand, Hopkins is getting older. Hopkins is also dealing with Treylon Burks, who is nursing some injuries that he's still recovering from. Again, Tennessee was not having a lot of success running the football in this game. There's going to be some situations where they just can rely on Derrick Henry to carry them, and they don't really need to use the receivers. And he's also a big name that you may be able to flip for some bigger targets who didn't have good games. I'm looking at guys like Jamar Chase, who we talked about in the last game, or T. Higgins is another wide receiver buy candidate that I mentioned. Those are guys that I would both try to have over DeAndre Hopkins. And if you could package Hopkins with somebody who had a great game as well as the 2-for-1 deal, I would try to go for either of those Bengals receivers over Hopkins. New Orleans, the big pickup candidate who's probably going to be one of the bigger ones in the NFL for fantasy football is Shaheed. Excuse me, almost had trouble saying that. But 2 for 11 on the ground. He also had 5 of 89 through the air and a touchdown. I don't really know if I trust the consistency of this performance week to week. He's the 3rd wide receiver on this team, but he is somebody to consider moving forward as a receiver that you can stash on your bench and keep an eye on. Somebody that I would also consider selling from this game, another big name receiver, is Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas, 5 of 61. He had 8 targets, which again, much like Hopkins, is an encouraging sign, but I would recommend selling them in certain situations because of the name value that you can get from it. People that haven't been keeping up with fantasy football will really keen in on names like DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, because those were once 1st, 2nd round draft picks. And you can trade for them to get somebody like a T. Higgins who has a much better outlook moving forward. This game was a fluke today. So just putting that out there. These are good names that you can package to try to get some of those buy candidates that I talk about. Next game that I want to talk about is San Francisco and Pittsburgh. And for San Francisco, the guy I want to highlight that you can pick up is Brock Purdy. So I think we need to stop looking at this guy as Mr. Irrelevant and 7th round draft pick and actually start looking at him as a valid NFL quarterback who can be used in fantasy football as well. People have kind of shied away from him because of the 7th round draft status and because of some of the hype of some of these other names like Kenny Pickett, who has kind of been a late round sleeper. But Brock Purdy easily outplayed Kenny Pickett today. He had 2 touchdowns through the air. He also had 20 yards rushing, which is very good as well, and a nice 17-yard rush. Purdy is looking like a good streaming candidate, and if very deep leagues, especially 2 quarterbacks leagues, he's a very good stash to have as well, because there's going to be games where consistency of performances like that can stand out. Keep in mind, this guy outplayed Lamar Jackson today in fantasy football. So, again, definitely worth considering picking him up if you're hurting at quarterback. I think he will be a very valuable asset who you can plug in from time to time as the season goes along. San Francisco. So, sell candidates. Brandon Ayiuk. I know a lot of people are probably going to be upset with that opinion, but Brandon Ayiuk, 129 and 2 on 8 targets. That's about as high of a ceiling as you can get for somebody like him. And that's a name where I honestly could imagine a scenario where if you put that name out there and say Brandon Ayiuk for T. Higgins straight up, there's some fantasy managers who would do that. But I still think that T. Higgins is a better value moving forward than Brandon Ayiuk, because the San Francisco offense is going to have a lot of different weapons at receiver. They have Deebo Samuel, who, by the way, is a good buy candidate. Not a great game, 555, but 7 targets. They have George Kittle coming back from injury. They also have Christian McCaffrey, who did some stuff through the air, but not as much. So I have a hard time seeing performances better than this for Brandon Ayiuk. So this is a good opportunity to go after a big name. Try to see if you can get someone off Brandon Ayiuk. But again, I say that in moderation because he's still looking like a very good fantasy asset moving forward. But it's worth seeing if you can get the big fishes with performance like this. Next, I want to talk about Pittsburgh. So not a ton of pickup candidates, but I do want to mention in leagues that are smaller to consider picking up Jaylen Warren. Najee Harris has continued to be underwhelming. Not a great game today, and Jaylen Warren is talked up as a guy that can be a good change of pace back. Got some opportunity today through the receiving game as well. He had 6 targets, 5 of 12, which a lot of that is game script driven, but at the same time, he's showing that he can get on the NFL field. And if Harris continues to be disappointing, then they may make a change here. So good idea to stash him now, see what happens with this Pittsburgh backfield moving forward. Another guy that I would consider buying that's probably on your rosters already is George Pickens. So Deontay Johnson injured in this game. Hamstrings, unfortunately, can take some time to recover from. Pickens had an okay game. He was 5 of 36 on 7 targets, but I expect that this performance will improve moving forward. Pittsburgh was going up against one of the best defenses in the NFL. Pickens is now going to emerge as the number 1 receiver for this team more than likely. This is a great buy low candidate who will put up better performances as the season goes along. I would highly recommend going after George Pickens. But again, I say, now in this same game, would I sell Brandon Ayiuk for George Pickens? No. But I'm saying that for some other players that you have that may have had good performances that are lower tier that you picked up on waivers, Pickens is somebody that you can consider buying. So you got to ask the question of what names would be a good person to trade for another player for. But again, for some other players that you have that had good games today, like Shaheed, for example, if you had him on your roster and then you're trying to trade for George Pickens, I would 100% take George Pickens over him. So depends on the names, but this is somebody that I would recommend buying. Washington and Arizona. So let's start with Arizona. Arizona, much like Carolina, Zach Ertz is a good target here. You're dealing with a quarterback who is limited, and Josh Dobbs relied heavily on Zach Ertz in this game. He had 10 targets, 6 receptions, and 21 yards. And now that's not great, but there's going to be some opportunities in the future where that turns into red zone targets, that turns into touchdowns. If you're hurting at the tight end position, like let's say you had Mark Andrews, he's hurt. Now then you try to pick up Isaiah Likely and he didn't do anything. Zach Ertz is somebody that you can consider. I do like Hayden Hurst more, but again, a good name to consider. A good buy low candidate on this team is James Conner. James Conner had a lot of volume in this game as well. He had 14 carries, 62 yards. He also had 5 receptions and only 8 yards out of that off 5 targets. But again, compared to the other running backs in this team, his performance was a lot better than everybody behind him. So this is a guy that's going to have more volume and more opportunity moving forward. He is a very touchdown-dependent player, but he has proven to be valuable in fantasy football in the past, and I think this is a good opportunity to buy low on him. For Washington, so one guy that I want to highlight on Washington, again at the tight end position, is Logan Thomas. We keep sleeping on this guy every year, and he never gets drafted, but he's been consistently involved with this team since they were the Washington Redskins. He's been a very reliable tight end, 8 targets, 4 of 43. He's going to have a lot of opportunity with Sam Howell moving forward to get into the red zone. And I like this baseline floor. He gives you a very consistent value as long as he stays healthy. Good candidate to pick up, again, if you're hurting at tight end. The guy that I would consider to sell on this team is Antonio Gibson. And again, this is a situation where you're selling at a pretty low value. But Antonio Gibson is a guy that has had one good second half of the season in 2020. He was hyped up in 2021, didn't really do much with that, and then he fell off the depth chart and kind of has been irrelevant since then. So I think this is kind of the point where the ship is probably sailed, at least as long as Ron Rivera is still the coach of this team. I do not think Antonio Gibson is going to get his opportunity on the field. Brian Robinson, 19 carries, Antonio Gibson 3. Brian Robinson, 2 targets, Antonio Gibson 1. And Gibson was supposed to be the change of pace back. So to me, I think that the ship has sailed. I would try to sell Antonio Gibson, and in certain situations, I would feel comfortable dropping him at this point. Next, we have Houston and Baltimore. So we'll start with Houston in this game. The Houston player I want to highlight is Nico Collins. Nico Collins is, I believe, a second or third year wide receiver. I can't remember exactly. But 6 of 80 on 11 targets. This is the guy that's emerging as number 1. And, you know, they lost Brandon Cooks last year. They need someone to fill the void on this team. Nico Collins has the most upside on this roster of guys that can fill the void, develop with CJ Stroud, and become a dependable wide receiver that can be plugged into flexes on a weekly basis. This is a good guy to consider stashing at this point and to see what happens. I think he could be a breakout candidate. Dameon Pierce is, and this is the only time I'm doing this in this video, but I would recommend holding, in some cases selling. So 11 of 38 for no touchdowns. He also had 3 targets and 2 of 9. So Dameon Pierce is a very talented player, but I really did not like how his outlook changed from this past offseason when they picked up Devin Singletary, because what happened in this game, and this is what I was worried about when trying to draft Pierce, is that you have Pierce 11 carries, Devin Singletary 7. So the point is that Devin Singletary is splitting the workload with Dameon Pierce. So the other thing is that Houston is not going to be in a situation where they're leading very often. They're not going to be a situation where they can just pound the ball and run the clock out. So I don't feel that Dameon Pierce has a ton of upside for that reason, but at the same time, I think that Pierce has a lot of potential value moving forward as well, because he is young and he's very talented and has a lot of potential as a running back developing in this league. So I would hold for now, but I think there's, again, situations where if you can package him for a more consistent running back like a Jahmyr Gibbs, I would try to do that. Let's go to Baltimore. So very sad injury for J.K. Dobbins, tore his Achilles. I personally have a lot of questions of whether or not he can even make it back to the NFL after that. He's dealt with a lot of knee injuries, and then It's every year he gets hurt. It's very sad. But with him going down, there comes an opportunity for another player. And one of the top running backs to consider picking up is Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards has been involved with this team for a long time. He knows the offense. He's going to have his opportunities. I'm not particularly high on Ravens running backs personally, so I would not recommend burning a ton of fab on Gus Edwards, but he is a guy that is going to step into a clear role that needs to be filled for the rest of the season. And this is an offense that's going to have a lot of opportunity as well. So this is a really good situation for you to consider picking up a running back that you need on waivers who's probably available. He's going to make an immediate impact. Other guys that I would consider that are as buy candidates, probably on your roster, but if not, then you need to pick them up immediately, is Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers led this team in targets by a long shot, 9 of 78 for 10 targets. The next player had 3. This was also a game in which Lamar Jackson played pretty terribly. He only had 17 completions. So of 22 attempts, he threw 10 of them to Zay Flowers. This is a guy that was going at the end of drafts. Honestly, if this guy is on your waivers, this is the #1 player that I am targeting. Again, this is the #1 player that I am targeting on waivers if he is there, because he is going to have his opportunities. He looks explosive. You can get him at a pretty low cost. So burn fab if you can. I would be comfortable spending up to about, and I don't really talk about fab a lot, but I would burn up to about 20% of what you have to try to get Zay Flowers at this point. Next game I want to talk about is Green Bay and Chicago. So again, quarterbacks that we like that we need to change our opinions on. Jordan Love. Jordan Love looks like he can be a good streaming candidate, and in 2 quarterbacks leagues, a weekly start candidate. This was an excellent game. He didn't really need to pass it a ton. He had 15 completions for 3 touchdowns. And, some of that is, you're going up against Chicago, which is a terrible team. But you really like how they performed in this game. And he didn't even have Christian Watson as top target. So really like the prospects of Jordan Love going forward. He's a good quarterback to consider picking up. A guy that I would consider buying is A.J. Dillon. So Aaron Jones had the big game. He's the big name guy that has been on this Packers team through many years with Aaron Rodgers, but he got injured in this game and has a hamstring injury. A running back of his age having a hamstring injury, especially when he was scoring a touchdown, is not a good sign. A.J. Dillon had a lot of opportunity in this game. He didn't really do much with it. Excuse me. But there's going to be a big role for him moving forward as Aaron Jones is dealing with this hamstring injury. Soft tissue injuries for running backs his age take time to heal. Consider buying A.J. Dillon if there's someone in your league looking to sell him. Chicago. Pick up Roschon Johnson. Khalil Herbert is the running back that gets the majority of the notoriety on this team, but Rashaad Johnson has upside to potentially usurp him as the lead running back. So consider picking him up if he's out there. DJ Moore, and again, don't want to sell people generally on low value, but I would definitely consider selling him here. 2 of 25 on 2 targets. This guy was traded for to be the #1 receiver. We've seen this story over and over again with DJ Moore in Charlotte, where he has all this potential. People really like him for his talent, and he is very talented, but he's just not consistent. He doesn't get targets consistently. He has some games where he breaks out, other games where he has a very poor performance, much like today. But what I don't understand in this game that's very concerning to me is that he's getting 2 targets, and you're getting guys like Darnell Mooney, Rashaad Johnson even, Cole Kmet, Khalil Herbert, Deonta Foreman. So they have 3 running backs on this team that are all getting more targets over DJ Moore. And again, Green Bay's got a good defense. Justin Fields is going to have his opportunities, but a lot of this is probably due to their offensive line being bad. And if the line is bad, more likely than not, you're going to have Fields dunking off to either tight ends or running backs or running it himself. So this all concerns me about DJ Moore's fantasy prospects moving forward. I would highly consider selling him if you can get one of these other players that I've talked about in this video. Next game that I want to talk about is the Las Vegas Raiders against the Denver Broncos. Vegas pulled out the victory 17-16. I don't really have any players that stand out to pick up from Las Vegas. Most of the players that put up numbers in this game have already been on rosters. However, if you have Josh Jacobs, I would consider picking up Zamir White as a handcuff. That's about it. All I have to say for that team. Guys on their roster, talked about Josh Jacobs. He is a great buy candidate. This guy had 19 carries. The next running back, Zamir White, had 1. That is about as excellent as a workload that you can get from a running back in this league. So you definitely want to consider picking up Josh Jacobs, especially he didn't even have a touchdown in this game. He was 19 of 48. He also had 3 targets for 23 yards, so he's getting work in the air as well. So this is a great buy low candidate to consider taking now that he's got his contract situation sorted out. That was really the only question mark with him this offseason. Doesn't look like anything has changed in terms of his workload. Pick up Josh Jacobs while he hasn't broken out yet. For the Denver Broncos. So for Denver, I want to highlight another tight end, Adam Troutman. So this was, again, nothing special, 5 of 34 for 5 targets. But the key thing I want to point out here is that Adam Troutman had 5 targets. Greg Dulcich had 2. He was 2 of 22. If you have Greg Dulcich, I think it's time to drop him. You can't spend a lot of time with guys like that, continuing to give them chances and leaving them on your bench. You got to go after wide receivers and running backs. If you have Greg Dulcich, I think you just need to cut bait at this point. And if you want to switch with someone on his own team, I would rather have Troutman at this point moving forward, because I think that in general, he's had that experience with Sean Payton, and he's going to get a lot of opportunity for that reason alone. So Dulcich, we'll see what happens, but I don't think he's worth rostering at this point. Another player on Denver I want to highlight, Javonte Williams. So they said Javonte Williams was going to get a workload time limit. He's going to be on a snap count, see how his knee recovery is. But he has 13 carries, 52 yards. 11 yards was his longest run today. He also had 6 targets, in which he had 4 receptions on 5 yards. Nothing special with that performance, but he's already getting the volume coming back from that ACL tear. We know he's an explosive athlete. Didn't do much in this game, but that workload is going to increase moving forward, and you're going to want to take advantage of him while he's still putting up performances that are not anything special. This is a great candidate to consider buying low on that you can probably get pretty cheap. Next game that I want to talk about, Philadelphia and New England. So for the Philadelphia Eagles, I want to highlight Kenneth Gainwell. Probably rostered in deep leagues, but if you're in smaller leagues, he's probably on waivers. This is the #1 running back on this team. 14 carries, 54 yards. Had some nice rushes today. He also had 4 receptions for 20 yards on as many targets. So this is the running back that you want to pick up on this team. He's the guy getting the workload, more juice than some of these other guys like Boston Scott and DeAndre Swift, who I'm about to talk about in the next player. But pick him up if he's on waivers. This is another guy that you really want to prioritize if he's out there. I would definitely pick him up if he's out there and burn at least 10% fab on him. Other guys on Philadelphia, also at the running back position, that you should sell is DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift was a player that I universally was avoiding in the draft this year because he's going in the 5th round, but was heading into a situation with multiple running backs, and the staff, coaching staff in Philadelphia even made that apparent. And then he comes out of this game and he has 1 carry for 3 yards. He also had 1 reception for 0 yards. So what does this tell you? It tells you that he's not going to break out as a running back that's going to get a huge volume. So if you took him in the 4th or 5th round of fantasy football drafts, then you're essentially getting absolutely nothing. This is time that you need to cut bait. Try to see if you can sell him now before he puts up more performances like this, because it's going to happen. And see if you can get somebody else who had a more poor game. If you can somehow manage to get somebody like a Jahmyr Gibbs out of this situation, or Joe Mixon with DeAndre Swift, this is a great example of somebody that I would consider trying to sell away with a great wide receiver performance. For New England. So New England, we didn't really know who their top receiver was going to be. Juju Smith-Schuster was the one that was generally drafted the highest. He did not have a very good game today. But we had Kendrick Bourne, who had 6 receptions of 64 yards and 2 touchdowns off 11 targets. Very good. So this is somebody just off the target count alone. I don't think he's going to put up performances like this again with 2 touchdowns on 6 receptions, but definitely a player that you want to pick up on waivers. I really like this pickup. And also Hunter Henry is another bonus one that I'm going to highlight as well. 556 and a touchdown. He's another tight end that gets consistently slept on, but is very involved in this offense. And buy candidates, Ramondre Stevenson. So Ramondre Stevenson, a high running back who's gone pretty high in drafts. He had 12 carries, 25 yards, nothing great. 6 of 64 on 6 targets, which was also nothing great. So you don't really like the numbers that he put up today, but what you do like is the fact that even with Zeke Elliott there, he is still getting a pretty good volume, especially through the air. So if you can get him at a pretty low price, I would consider doing it. Ramondre Stevenson is going to have better performances moving forward. 2 games left. I'm not going to talk about the Dallas and New York Giants game because as of now, this game is at halftime and it's an absolute blowout, 26-0. So maybe I'll talk about it later, but yeah. Miami at Los Angeles. This was one of the best games today. First of all, if you have Tyreek Hill, you probably won this week. So congratulations if you have him. For Miami, one of the players I would consider picking up is Dillon, what is Durham Smith? I almost said Dillon Smith. So Mike Gesicki left, and he was a good tight end streaming candidate. Durham Smith is another guy that is worth considering. 3 of 44 of 7 targets in a high-octane offense. So if you're ranking these tight ends that I've listed here, he would probably be my number 2 tight end pickup. 1 would be Hurst. I would say second would be Durham Smith, and then third would be either Irv Smith or Zach Ertz. That's how I would probably rank the tight ends that I've talked about in this video that you consider picking up. And then Sam Laporta is an honorable mention as well. But Durham Smith is going to have opportunity in an offense like this that is very explosive, as we saw today. I really like him as a tight end pickup that's not getting a lot of notoriety. He actually had more targets than Jaylen Waddle in this game. And then sell candidates. So again, I'm going to caveat this by saying is that only do this if you are getting the elite is Tyreek Hill. So, and you may be thinking like, why would you sell Tyreek Hill when he just had a game like this where he had over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns? But the point is that if you can flip Tyreek Hill for Jamar Chase straight up, there's a debate of whether or not you would do that. I personally probably would because I think Chase is going to be a little more consistent. But based on Tyreek Hill's performance, it's possible that you can get somebody like a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase, plus another player for Hill. So if you could get one of these other backup running backs, this is one of those rare situations where maybe doing a 1 for 2 could be beneficial. But again, you only do this if you're getting just a handful of players. I would say those handful are Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and that's probably it. If you can get any of those 4 players for Tyreek Hill off this performance, I would probably recommend trying to do that. But again, very few situations like that. But again, if you're trying to go for like a CMC or a Justin Jefferson, maybe this is the opportunity to do it. For Los Angeles, some of those players that I want to target for them are Josh Kelly. So what we saw in this game is that he's getting a lot of workload as well. Austin Eckler, 16 carries, Joshua Kelly, 16 carries. So they're going to have opportunity to give Kelly the ball moving forward and get him involved in this offense. Eckler is going to be the driving force of this team moving forward, but if anything were to happen to him, then Kelly is going to give you a lot of value. And he showed today that he can be explosive. He can be a featured back on this team. Guys that I would recommend buying is Keenan Allen. So Keenan Allen led this team in targets, 6 of 76, 9 targets. A lot of people don't have a high opinion on him this season because last season he was injured and missed a lot of the year. But he's getting a lot of looks in this offense. Didn't get a touchdown this game. great buy candidate, and he's generally always very consistent as well. So this is someone that you want to consider targeting, who's going to be the featured receiver in an elite offense like this. Didn't get a touchdown this game. Really like his outlook as a candidate that you want to buy. Last game that we'll talk about before we wrap up this video is Los Angeles and Seattle. Los Angeles. So the big wide receiver pickup for them is going to be Puka Nacua. And this, other than Zay Flowers, is the number 2 wide receiver that I'm looking for. Because he is, 15 targets, 10 receptions, 119 yards. He's involved. And this offense of Los Angeles is showing that it has improved since last season, where they kind of disappointed. Matt Stafford's elbow was messed up, weren't clicking very well. But this game showed that the Rams are going to be a competitive team this year, and Puka Nacua is going to have his opportunities. Tutu Atwell is another one considering as well. I really liked him coming out of college 2 years ago. This could be a good opportunity for him as well. The only thing is that for Atwell is that, we question his ceiling because he's been on the roster for a bit, hasn't broken out yet. But Nacua is a more recent receiver who gives you a little more of that upside because of the unknown. So I would probably recommend Nacua first, but Atwell is another receiver that I would definitely consider on this team. Cooper Kupp is actually a buy candidate for me, because if you're in a situation where you have a good roster and you feel comfortable stashing him, this game shows me that Los Angeles is going to be competitive again. So if you buy Kupp and you're willing to wait with him on the IR for a few weeks, whenever Kupp comes back, he's going to get these same type of performances that you saw from Atwell and Puka Nacua today. So just throwing that out there, because this is somebody that I would highly recommend buying. And if you have an IR spot, it's good to stash him. It gives you leverage also in other trades potentially as well. Because this is the name that is very popular, and when it starts getting close to their return, there's always that hype that is a little bit higher than what it typically is for those players. So something to consider as well. He could be a good asset for you to either keep or to flip for something even better moving forward. As for Seattle, this is another situation. I really don't have consistent names that I would recommend picking up on this roster from this game. I would say Zach Charbonnet is somebody to consider in very deep leagues. But I don't really like his outlook a lot either, because Kenneth Walker had a pretty solid game that was affected by game script a little bit, but getting a lot more carries than Charbonnet. But again, deep leagues, it's always good to have a handcuff for a running back like him. Sell candidates. So I would personally sell DK Metcalf. This is a receiver that is very hyped up, has a big name, but in my opinion has never put up consistent performances. He has games where he goes off and is incredible, but then there's other times where he gets shut down, and you never really can tell when that's going to be. So for me personally, I've generally strayed away from DK Metcalf because of how high he goes in drafts. He did not have a very good game today. He did get a touchdown, which salvaged a fantasy performance that was only 3 of 47 yards outside of the touchdown. Maybe this is a good opportunity to try to sell him away and see if you can get a better receiver like some of the ones that I've talked about earlier in this video that can give you more consistency. So that's all that I've got here. If you stuck around to the end for this video, thank you so much. If you have not already, please subscribe to my channel for fantasy football advice, as well as a lot of other types of videos as well. And thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.